Welcome to the real Wild West, where death is a frequent guest and hope is as thin as the tattered curtain in a crooked shack's window. Here, each new day is a lottery where darkness, filth, and despair win more often than life does. You are a doctor, and if you think that sounds noble, think again. Your arsenal is rusty tools and tired hands. Your patients are people who have lost more than they can remember, and your methods are a mix of meager knowledge and constant improvisation. But before you get comfortable, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd really love to see who's joined us. Now, settle in. We're about to begin. You wake before the first hint of dawn seeps through the cracks in the wooden boards that serve as your only window. The air in your small, lopsided cabin is cold and wet, thick with the scent of old straw, boiled cabbage, and something else. A vague aroma of blood, perhaps, or rot. Your blanket, if you can call it that, is scratchy and smells faintly of mold, but it is the only thing standing between your shivering flesh and the morning chill that creeps up from the dirt floor. You lie there for a moment, staring at the sagging ceiling above, where lazy spiders have woven their intricate traps in the corners. One of them has caught a moth overnight. You watch as it crawls closer, preparing to wrap its prey in silk, a patient killer that does not rush its work. In that moment, you envy the spider. At least it has a purpose as clear as the sunrise. Yours, on most days, feels as stale as the bread you will soon try to choke down for breakfast. It is always cold here, even in summer. You often wonder why you, of all people, came west. Was it the promise of gold, the adventure, the vague hope of a better life? Now you only remember the smell of city streets after rain and the warmth of a real bed. There is nothing here except dust, wind, and death. You have become intimately familiar with all three. You shift, pulling the blanket tighter, but it does not help. There are voices in the back of your mind, groans of the dying, screams of women in labor, curses hurled at you by men too drunk to feel their own pain. You hear them even in your sleep. You wake with their faces, eyes wide with terror or dull with resignation, staring at you from the darkness. Your room is a testament to necessity, not comfort. There is no stove, only a battered fireplace you use for boiling water when there is water to be boiled and when you can scrounge up enough wood. The table in the center of the room is your workbench, dinner table, and sometimes your operating theater. On it are the scars of countless desperate surgeries, gouges from your knife, blackened stains that refuse to be washed away, and a single deep groove where a bone saw once slipped from your shaking hand. In the corner, there is a cracked basin filled with last night's water, now cloudy and motionless. Next to it, a pile of rags so soaked with old blood they have taken on the color and consistency of dried leather. You should have burned them weeks ago, but you are always too tired, and besides, you never know when you will need them again. There is a shelf nailed unevenly into the wall that holds your medical library, a dog eared anatomy book, 2 or 3 leaflets on herbal remedies, and a notebook filled with your own trembling scrawl. You sometimes read the notes late at night, hoping for answers, but they offer none. Each page is a record of failure, a tally of the lives you could not save. The rest of your possessions are as meager as your hope. A single change of clothes, a battered coat, a pair of boots with holes in the soles, and a tin cup that never seems to be clean. You keep your few coins in a jar under the mattress, but the weight of them is barely enough to notice. Outside, the wind howls. It rattles the walls and makes the roof creak as if the whole place is about to collapse on top of you. Sometimes you wish it would, just to be done with it all, but you know it will not. The buildings out here may look fragile, but they cling to life with the same stubbornness as their occupants. Your mornings always begin the same way, eyes open, heart pounding, mind racing with 1,000 little worries that never leave you. Will today be better than yesterday? Will someone come pounding on your door before breakfast, begging for help? Will you have to cut into another screaming body, armed with nothing but whiskey and a dull knife? You sit up slowly. The cold bites at your bones, and you shudder as you swing your legs over the edge of the bed. Your bare feet sink into the packed dirt floor. You listen. Sometimes, if you are lucky, there is nothing but the wind and the distant howl of coyotes. Other mornings, you hear footsteps or the frantic knocking of a desperate soul come to barter for another hour of life. Today, there is silence. For now, you shuffle to the table, brushing aside a pile of notes and bandages. You find the stub of a candle and light it, the flame flickering as if unsure whether it wants to survive. You pour what is left of last night's coffee into your cup. It is bitter and cold, but you drink it anyway. You look at your hands, at the lines and scars and stains that never wash out. These are the tools of your trade, more reliable than any scalpel. You flex your fingers, testing for stiffness, as if you expect them to refuse you one day. On the wall, a single photograph. It is faded and cracked, but you remember the faces. A family, once yours, left behind in the world you barely remember. You stare at it a moment, wondering if they would even recognize you now with your hollow eyes and trembling hands. You sigh and stand. Another day on the frontier, another day of mud, blood, and disappointment. You tell yourself you are ready, but you know you never are. No one is. Not really. You walk to the door, hand hovering over the latch. You do not want to open it, but you know you will. You always do. Out there is a world that does not care if you are tired, if you are hungry, if you have nothing left to give. You take a deep breath, brace yourself, and open the door. The darkness greets you. So does the cold, and so does the endless, silent expectation of the living and the dying, waiting, always waiting for you. You wish sometimes that the sun would just stay down so you would have an excuse not to begin. But it does not. The first light trickles in, and through the chinks between the warped boards, painting everything a colorless gray. There is no beauty in this dawn, only the pale revelation of how much grime clings to every surface. You move across the uneven floor, dodging the worst of the mud patches that have crept inside since last week's storm. Your boots squelch anyway. You make your way to what passes for your kitchen, a table held together by splinters and hope, a single chair, and a shelf where you keep your supplies. The shelf wobbles, protesting every time you touch it, but it has not collapsed yet. Like you, it endures because it has no other choice. You pick up your breakfast. It is the same as it was yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that. A chunk of bread, harder than pine and barely more appetizing. You break off a piece, listening to it crack like old bones. The bread has the flavor of dust and a faint aftertaste of something you cannot quite name. You imagine it is what regret tastes like. You stare at the loaf, wondering how long it has been here. A week? 2 weeks? You lost count after the last shipment failed to arrive. The wagon stuck in the mud miles outside of town. Maybe you will have flour next month, if the roads ever clear. Maybe you will not. You chew anyway, jaw aching, and remind yourself you have seen worse. You have seen men gnawing on bark when the food ran out, seen children lick lard from a greasy rag for breakfast. Next to the bread is a small, battered tin of coffee grounds. You keep it hidden most of the time, like some precious secret. You scrape together enough for 1 weak cup, not bothering to strain out the grit. The water is as cold as the morning, and it tastes vaguely of iron and moss. You drink it anyway. You need it, or at least you think you do. Sometimes, when the headaches come, it is the only thing that keeps your mind from splitting in half. You peer into the chipped bowl sitting in the center of the table. Inside, a lump of porridge stares back at you, gray and lumpy. It was yesterday's dinner and will likely be tonight's, too. Sometimes you are almost sure it moves, just a little, as if protesting its own existence. You dig in with a wooden spoon, forcing yourself to swallow. The porridge is cold, but it fills a corner of your stomach, which is more than most can say. On the other side of the table, you keep a hunk of cheese. You cut a thin slice, watching the mold swirl in strange blue veins across its surface. You remember, for a brief moment, the taste of fresh cheese, rich and soft. Here, such things are rare as gold. You eat the cheese anyway, mold and all. If you get sick, you will know who to blame. Sometimes you are lucky, and a neighbor leaves you a rabbit or a few eggs, payment for a favor, or perhaps an apology for something said in anger. Today, there are no gifts. You eat in silence, alone, except for the buzzing of a few stubborn flies that survive the night. They land on your bread, on your spoon, on your face. You swat at them half-heartedly, knowing they will win in the end. You think about the day ahead. You will see the same faces, hear the same complaints, taste the same fear in the air. The world here is small, and every person's business is everyone's. You know whose child is sick, who was caught stealing from the store, who lost a hand to the sawmill, and who, quietly and without fuss, simply disappeared. You finish your meal, such as it is, licking the crumbs from your fingers. You wipe your hands on your trousers, adding another layer of grime to the many already there. Cleanliness is a luxury here, reserved for those with nothing better to do. You, the town's only doctor, are always busy. You glance at the clock on the mantelpiece. It does not work, but you check it anyway. Old habits die hard. The sun is up now. The gray has faded to a flat, colorless light. Through the window, you see the dirt street, the empty well, the sad row of clapboard buildings. You see nothing moving, but you know it is only a matter of time. You clean up what is left of your breakfast. You save the crumbs for later, as you always do. Nothing goes to waste out here, not even regret. You pour the last dregs of coffee into your mouth, wincing at the bitterness, and set the cup aside. There is no milk, and there will not be for weeks. The nearest cow died last winter, and nobody has dared buy another. You are still hungry, but you are always hungry. Hunger becomes another part of you, like the ache in your back or the rawness in your hands. It sits in your gut, a dull reminder that life here is nothing but survival, measured out in crusts of bread and spoonfuls of cold porridge. You stand and stretch, your bones popping like musket fire. The room is no warmer than it was before, and the wind pushes through the cracks, sending a shiver up your spine. You wrap your coat around you, check your pockets for any sign of a forgotten biscuit or scrap of jerky. You find nothing. Somewhere outside, a rooster crows. It sounds sickly, as if even the animals are tired of waking up. You sigh and pick up your doctor's bag, heavy with instruments and heavier with dread. Another day begins, another breakfast over, another hunger unsatisfied, another reminder that you are alive, if only just. You take a breath and approach your instruments. Calling them instruments always feels generous. In another life, they might have been tools for craftsmen, not healers. In this one, they are your only allies and your constant shame. They sit on a shelf by the window, arranged in a kind of order only you understand. The glass is too dirty for sunlight to do much good, but you can still see the dull gleam of metal if you squint. Your surgical saw is the pride of your collection, if pride is the right word. Its teeth are worn from years of bone and gristle, and there are flecks of rust along the handle where your sweaty palm grips too tight. The blade is sharp enough, you suppose. Sometimes it snags, and you wonder if the metal is growing tired too. The handle is wrapped in rags, remnants of shirts long since unwearable. They are less for comfort and more to keep your own blood, sweat, and tears from mixing with the blood of strangers. Beside the saw is your pair of forceps, which have lost whatever polish they once possessed. The hinge creaks as if groaning in anticipation. You open and close them a few times, feeling the old resistance. There is no oil to spare, and water only makes the rust grow faster. They are as stubborn as you are, refusing to yield even as they corrode. A set of scalpels lies in a battered box, blades lined up like teeth in a jaw. Most are chipped or blunted. You have tried to sharpen them with a whetstone, but the result is always the same, an edge that tugs at flesh rather than gliding through it. You make a mental note, as you do every morning, to request new ones from the next trader passing through. You know you will forget, or the trader will never arrive. There is a jar of ether, cloudy and half evaporated, with a rag jammed in the neck. You shake it gently. The fumes make your eyes water, even from a distance. You have not used it in weeks. No one here can afford the luxury of unconsciousness, least of all you. Instead, you keep a bottle of whiskey under the table for those who need it most. Sometimes you take a swig yourself before a particularly grim task, hoping it will steady your hands. It never does. Bandages are a luxury you cannot afford to waste. What you have are strips of linen, cut from shirts and sheets, boiled when you have water to spare. Most are stained brown or yellow, and the edges are frayed from too many washings. You keep them in a tin, lid pressed tight to keep the flies out. When you open it, the scent of old blood and lye rises, a reminder of every wound you have failed to heal. There are needles, thick and bent, and black thread you use for sutures. You once dreamed of silk, the kind used by real doctors in cities back east. Here, you are lucky if you find a thread that will not snap under tension. The needles you sharpen with a file, praying they do not break halfway through the flesh. You have lost count of how many have disappeared inside desperate bodies, swallowed by the chaos of your own exhaustion. Somewhere in the bottom of your bag is a stethoscope, more a curiosity than a tool. The earpieces are cracked and the tubing leaks. You listen to chests and backs, more out of habit than hope. The real diagnosis comes from your nose and eyes, the color of the sputum, the sound of the cough, the waxiness of the skin. You tell yourself you are practicing medicine. In truth, you are just guessing and hoping you guess right, more often than not. Your medicine chest is a crate lined with straw. Inside, there are a few jars of salve, bear fat mixed with herbs, some dried willow bark for pain, and a small bottle of laudanum, which you ration like a miser. There are also 3 vials of quinine, a treasure beyond price, reserved for those whose fever burns too high to ignore. You stare at the bottles, counting them again, just to be sure they have not vanished overnight. You clean your tools as best you can. A rag, dipped in yesterday's water, does little but smear the grime around. You rub until your hands ache. There is no such thing as sterile out here, just less filthy. You scrape dried blood from the scalpel, watching as it flakes off onto the table, adding to the black stains that never quite go away. Sometimes you try to remember what you learned long ago, in that classroom filled with sunlight and polished glass. The professor's voice, calm and certain, explaining the wonders of antisepsis. Here, you are grateful if you can keep the flies from laying eggs in open wounds. You wonder what your old professor would think of you now, spitting on your hands before digging into another infected leg, praying that luck will be enough. Your apron hangs from a nail, crusted and stiff. You put it on, shuddering at the cold slap against your chest. It smells of old lard and older blood. You tie it tight, a ritual you perform every day, like a knight donning armor before battle. Only your battles are not noble. They are long, dirty, and almost always lost. Every tool you own has a story. This saw belonged to a barber who vanished one winter. The forceps were a gift from a woman who died in childbirth. The stethoscope, a curiosity from a traveling salesman who found the West too rough and fled east again, pockets empty but heart intact. You keep these things close, not for sentiment, but because you have nothing else. You pick up the saw, testing the blade with your thumb. It nicks you, as it always does, a reminder that even dull things can hurt. You wipe the blood on your apron and set the saw down, ready for whatever comes next. You glance out the window. The street is waking up. You know it will not be long before someone appears, clutching their side, or limping, or screaming for you. You hope it is something simple, a cough, a bruise, a scraped knee. It never is. You sit, hands folded, waiting. Your instruments lie before you, silent and expectant, as if they too are bracing for the day ahead. You wish you could tell them it will not be so bad today. But you cannot lie to metal. They already know the truth, and so do you. You are still rinsing blood from the creases of your knuckles when the banging starts. The sound is not polite. It is not a knock, but a demand. Angry fists pounding against warped wood, as if sheer force might open the door faster than your weary hands ever could. You wipe your hands on your apron and limp to the entrance, already bracing yourself for what you know is coming. The sun has barely cleared the rooftops, but violence, like the rooster, is always first to rise out here. You open the door. A trio of men stand before you, faces lined with exhaustion and dust. Their hats are pulled low, but you recognize them all. One is the blacksmith's oldest son, another a ranch hand, with the posture of someone used to sleeping rough. Between them, supported by their arms, is a man you only half remember, but his name comes to you anyway, Elijah. You patched his hand the previous winter after he got it caught in a corral gate. Now he is bent double, face pale, shirt dark with blood blooming from his left side. He's been shot, says the blacksmith's son, as if you could mistake it for anything else. The wound is fresh, and so is the fear in their eyes. You step aside, and together they maneuver Elijah inside, more or less dropping him onto your table, the same one you used for breakfast just moments ago. You close the door behind them, shutting out the pale morning and the crowd already gathering. There are always watchers, always the neighbor with nothing better to do than count the bodies that pass through your door. You ignore them for now. Elijah groans as you pull his shirt aside. The wound is messy, a ragged hole just above his hip, pulsing with bright red blood. The fabric is stuck fast to the flesh, and you have to rip it free, listening to him swear through clenched teeth. There is the usual smell: iron, sweat, the tang of old leather from the inside of his jacket. But underneath it all, something else: fear thick enough to choke on. Who shot him, you ask, not because you care, but because it fills the silence. The men mumble a name: a neighbor from up the valley, an argument over cattle or water, or maybe nothing at all. Here, men shoot for reasons that vanish in the morning light. You focus on the wound. The bullet is still inside. You can feel it with your finger, hot, round, and immovable. You ask for whiskey. They hand it to you, and Elijah gulps as much as you allow, his Adam's apple bobbing furiously. You tell him to bite on a leather strap, and he obeys, teeth gnashing like a dog's. There is no gentle way to do this. You reach for your forceps, rusty, stiff, the hinge protesting every movement. The others look away as you dig into the wound, fishing for metal. Elijah's body goes rigid. He screams, not a short, sharp sound, but a long, wet wail that rattles the bottles on the shelf. You are used to this. Pain is the only thing you can guarantee your patients. The bullet slips free, rolling into the blood on your apron. You hold it up for the others to see, as if this is a magic trick, a small miracle. No one claps. Elijah just breathes, ragged and shuddering, sweat pouring down his face in rivers. Now comes the hard part. You need to stop the bleeding, but your fingers are numb and your thread keeps knotting. The wound is too deep for comfort, too shallow for certainty. You pack it with rags, never as clean as you would like, and stitch the edges closed, the needle passing through flesh with the sound of fabric tearing. Elijah's hands grip the edge of the table, knuckles white. The others hold him down, but only just. You pour what is left of the whiskey over the wound. The blood froths, and Elijah screams again. You press a bandage against the hole, hoping it will hold. You have seen this go both ways. Sometimes the bleeding stops, and the wound dries up like old leather. Other times, fever comes for the patient, silent and merciless, and all your work is for nothing. You catch your breath, hands shaking. You are sweating too, though the morning air is still cold. The room stinks of blood and fear. You glance up at the men. They do not thank you. They ask if he will live. You say, I have done what I can. It is the only honest answer you have. You do not mention the nights you have watched wounds just like this fester, flesh turning black and hard, the patient begging for the saw. You ask them to carry Elijah to the cot in the corner. He is limp, eyes glassy, mouth moving in silent prayer. The men lay him down and pull the blanket over him, careful not to meet your eyes. They have seen what you have seen. They know how often hope gives way to death. You scrub your hands in the basin, red water swirling down the drain. The blood will never come out, not from your fingers, not from your mind. You glance at the bullet on the table. You wonder how many you have removed, how many are still inside those you could not save. Outside, the watchers have moved closer. You hear their whispers, gossip already starting, odds laid down on Elijah's survival. Life here is cheap, and stories are all anyone has. You wipe your hands on your apron, check Elijah's pulse, and listen for the sound of his breathing. For now, he lives. For now, that is enough. The men leave, their boots thudding on the floor. You hear the sigh of relief as the door closes behind them, but you know it will not last. There will be more like Elijah, always more. Arguments turn to bullets, faster than wounds turn to scars. You sit, elbows on your knees, listening to the shallow rasp of Elijah's breath. You close your eyes and count to 10, telling yourself this is just another morning. The day has barely begun. And already the table is blood-stained. Already another life hangs in the balance. Already you are tired beyond words. You are cleaning the blood from your forceps with a rag that is only marginally less dirty than your apron when you hear the next visitor. This time, the knock is timid, almost apologetic. 3 soft taps, as if the caller hopes you might not answer. You sigh, already knowing the rhythm. Toothache brings humility to even the proudest, and nothing humbles faster or more thoroughly than pain that will not let go. You call for them to come in. The door creaks open, revealing Mrs. Henshaw, hunched and thin, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders despite the morning's growing warmth. She is clutching her jaw with one hand, her face twisted in agony. Behind her, her youngest son hovers, as if ready to bolt the moment your eyes meet his. Mrs. Henshaw's voice is a thin whisper. It's come back, doctor, worse than last time. You nod, already bracing yourself for the work ahead. Toothaches out here are more than inconvenience. They are a slow, relentless torture that wears a body down day after day until even the strongest spirit breaks. You gesture for her to sit. She lowers herself into the chair with a wince, never letting go of her face. You ask her which tooth is the culprit, and she parts her lips just enough for you to see. Inside her mouth is a landscape of neglect, yellowed stumps, gums swollen and raw, 2 teeth missing from the last time she visited you. The offending molar is easy to spot, its blackened surface shining with pus. You look at your tools and wish for something sharper, something cleaner, but you have only the same battered set of forceps you use for everything from bullets to barnacles. You pour a little whiskey into a cup and hand it to her. She tries to sip, but the pain is too great. Most of it spills down her chin. You tell her to hold still and brace her head against the back of the chair. You have no chloroform, no ether. Anesthetic is for the rich or the lucky. Out here, you rely on speed, strength, and the patient's willingness to scream. Mrs. Henshaw, to her credit, does not scream at first. She bites down on a rag, her eyes squeezed shut, her knuckles white as you work the forceps around the rotten tooth. It never comes easy. The root is curved, tangled deep in inflamed gum. You tug, then twist, then pull again, sweat prickling down your spine. The sound is always the same, a wet crack, like splitting old wood, followed by a gush of blood and the low moan of a soul barely hanging on. The tooth finally gives way, coming free in a rush of red and yellow. You hold it up, a trophy as ugly as anything you have ever seen. Mrs. Henshaw sags back, her face pale and shining with tears. Her son is weeping quietly now, though he tries to hide it. You press a wad of old linen against the wound and tell her to keep biting down. You wish you could give her something for the pain, but the last of your laudanum is reserved for more desperate cases. All you can offer is a handful of salt and the hope that infection will not set in before the wound closes. You clean your forceps again, the tooth clattering into a tin with the others you have pulled this month. There are many. You could almost build a fence with them if you had the time and the inclination. Each tooth tells a story of hardship, winters too long, meals too sparse, water too brackish, sweets too rare to blame for any of it. Decay comes from simple neglect, and neglect is the only thing in abundance out here, Mrs. Henshaw tries to thank you, but the words come out muffled, choked by the linen and the pain. Her son helps her stand, supporting her as if she were made of glass. You watch them leave, knowing she will be back again, if not for another tooth, then for some other malady that comes from living in a place that grinds people down one ache at a time. You make a note in your ledger, a crooked entry lost among all the others. Henshaw, molar, left, pulled, bleeding. It is not medicine as your teachers described it. It is damage control, a never ending war of attrition fought with dull tools and a sharper sense of inevitability. The sun climbs higher, and the world outside grows louder. Children shout in the distance, chasing each other through the dust. Somewhere, a dog barks and a door slams. But inside your little surgery, it is always quiet in the aftermath. The only sound is your own breath and the familiar, steady ache in your back, a reminder that you are the only barrier between your neighbors and the slow decay that waits for everyone here. You glance at your tin of teeth. Each one is a tiny monument to suffering, a grim tally of all the pain you have eased and all the pain you have yet to face. You wonder, not for the first time, if anyone east of the Mississippi would believe this is what medicine truly looks like. You put the forceps away, flex your aching hands, and listen for the next knock on your door. You know it will not be long. Out here, there is always another ache, another wound, another reminder that life is just a series of pains, some louder than others. And you are always here, waiting, forceps ready, for whatever comes next. There are knocks you dread more than others. You can tell them apart by their urgency, the way they rattle the hinges and summon the neighbors from their porches. The worst ones always come at odd hours, deep in the night, long after you have scraped the day's blood from your fingernails, or just as the last shreds of evening light drain from the sky. The women come for you then, faces drawn, voices low. There is always fear in their eyes, even if they try to hide it with bravado and platitudes about God's will. Today, the knock comes at midday, sharp and persistent. You know what it means before you even open the door: childbirth. In this town, every new life is a gamble, and the odds are rarely good. The woman waiting on your porch is Mrs. Dorsey's eldest daughter, hair askew, cheeks streaked with dust and panic. She does not need to say a word. You grab your bag, already packed with thread, rags, and what little hope you have left, and follow her out into the hard, bright sun. The Dorsey house is at the edge of town, a long, low shape, half swallowed by tall grass and the memory of last year's blizzard. Inside, the air is thick, part heat, part worry, and part the sharp, metallic tang of old pain misses. Dorsey lies on a thin mattress, face beaded with sweat, hair plastered to her temples. Her hands twist the sheet into knots. Around her, women move in tense circles. Her daughters, a neighbor, a friend whose name you forget. You kneel beside her and ask how long the labor has lasted. Too long is the answer, always too long. She moans and turns away, her body refusing to yield. You check her pulse, her breathing, the slow, stubborn progress of a child who does not want to meet the world. Your hands move with practiced routine, but your heart is heavy with the knowledge of how quickly things can go wrong. The room is crowded, humid, and dim. The window is open, but the air does not move. Flies gather at the corners, drawn by the scent of blood and fear. You wipe your brow with the back of your sleeve and try not to think about the stories, how 100 miles east, babies are born in clean rooms with doctors who have more than rags and boiled water to rely on. Here, it is just you, your hands, and the weight of responsibility pressing down on your shoulders. You try to soothe her, though you both know the words are empty. You have seen too many women labor for hours, for days, until their strength is gone and the child remains stubbornly out of reach. You tell her to push when the pain comes, to breathe in shallow, desperate gasps. The other women hold her hands, whispering prayers and promises that sound more like apologies. The labor drags on, stretching time until every minute feels like an hour. You lose track of how many times you wipe her brow, how many times you listen to the child's heartbeat, faint, then stronger, then faint again. You feel the tension in the room shift as hope rises and falls, a tide controlled by pain and panic. Sometimes, when the hours grow long and the light fades from the window, you think of your own mother, of the sisters you left behind in some other life. You wonder if their births were easier, if their doctors had more to offer than old rags and whispered encouragement. Here, you are all they have, and you are never enough. Finally, something gives. Mrs. Dorsey screams, her voice ragged and animal, and you see the crown of the child's head. You urge her to push again, harder this time. She obeys, teeth gritted, eyes wild. With one last, desperate effort, the child slides free, slick, silent, and strangely small. There is a moment, always, where the world holds its breath. You wipe the child's face, praying for a cry. It comes, weak and reedy, but it is enough. The women exhale, voices trembling with relief. You wrap the child in a scrap of clean cloth. Miraculously, you have found one and hand it to Mrs. Dorsey. She clings to the bundle as if it might disappear. You are not done. The bleeding is worse than you hoped. You press down, hands slick with blood, muttering instructions you know they cannot follow. The women scramble for clean water, but there is never enough. You stitch what you can, tie off what you must, and hope that the wound will close before life drains away. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it does not. You clean your hands with what is left of your water and stagger outside, gulping air like a drowning man. The sun is low now, the day almost gone. You watch the shadows grow long across the fields and think of all the women you have seen go through this, how some survived and some did not, how each birth is a roll of the dice no one wants to play. Back inside, Mrs. Dorsey is asleep, her breath shallow but steady. The women thank you, voices hushed. You nod, gathering your tools, wrapping up your stained apron, tucking the soiled rags away for boiling. There will be more births, more blood, more narrow escapes. You never get used to it. You never get better at it. You just keep going because stopping is not an option. On the way home, you pass by the cemetery, rows of wooden crosses, some with names, some already forgotten. You think about all the mothers and children who lie there, and you wonder if they remember your hands, your voice, your desperate attempts to hold back the tide. You reach your cabin in the dark, exhausted and empty. You wash what you can, eat what little you have, and lie down in silence, waiting for the next knock on your door. Here, on the edge of everything, even new life comes wrapped in pain and shadows. And you, as always, are the last line between hope and loss. You return to your cabin in the dusk, shoulders heavy with defeat and the sticky residue of someone else's blood on your sleeves. For a brief moment, you rest your forehead against the door, breathing in the splintered smell of pine and wood smoke, and you try to remember what it felt like to have choices. Once, in another world, you imagined a future where a doctor's bag was always full and clean, where medicines came in neat bottles and real glass jars, each one labeled in an elegant hand. Tonics for the nerves, salves for the skin, tinctures for every ache and fever. You even dreamed once of a white coat. Here, Your apothecary is a shelf and a box. More hope than healing, more desperation than science. No matter how carefully you arrange your supplies, they always seem to shrink like a river in drought. Sometimes you wonder if the bottles simply evaporate from despair. You inventory your collection every morning, but the exercise never brings comfort. There are only 3 vials of quinine left, cloudy and precious, for the fevers that come with the rains and the mosquitoes. You hide them behind the cracked anatomy book, out of sight of curious children and desperate adults who might be tempted to help themselves. There are 2 sticks of willow bark, dried and splintering, for pain and inflammation when you can get the locals to chew it, which is not often. Most prefer whiskey. Sometimes you do too. Next to the willow bark is a battered tin containing the dregs of what once was salve, bear fat, beeswax, and a few handfuls of whatever wild herbs you found last spring. The smell is sharp and earthy, not exactly pleasant, but better than the alternative. Open wounds left to fester in the heat and dust. You use it sparingly because you do not know when you will make more, and the bears seem to have moved farther upriver, wise to your intentions. There is laudanum, or what passes for it, a single bottle, half empty, tucked away for emergencies. You do not waste it on toothaches or broken fingers. You save it for childbirth gone wrong, or for the dying, when there is nothing left to do but soften the edges of the pain. You ration it so strictly that some nights you dream of just pouring it all into your own cup and letting the world pass by in a blur of opium and forgetfulness. But you do not, because you are the only doctor for 100 miles, and you cannot afford to be useless. Other jars hold odds and ends: cayenne pepper for bleeding, turpentine for lice, vinegar for cleaning wounds when the whiskey runs out. There is a jar of honey, solidified into a golden brick. You chip off pieces when you can. For coughs, you mix it with wild onion and hope your patients are too polite to gag. For wounds, you smear it on and claim it is a new European invention. Sometimes it seems to help. Sometimes it just attracts more flies. Your herbs are whatever will grow in the poor, stubborn soil outside your window. Yarrow, for slowing the blood. Mint, for masking the taste of other, less pleasant treatments. And a handful of dried sage, more often burned for the smell than used for any real cure. You remember stories from medical school about the wonders of digitalis, but the foxglove here is not to be trusted. You tried once and nearly killed a cow. On your shelf is a stack of folded rags, most stained with past failures. You boil them when you can, adding a splash of vinegar to chase away the worst of the stink, but nothing ever smells truly clean. Cotton is a rarity, so you take whatever you can get: old petticoats, shirt sleeves, the occasional tablecloth traded for your services. Sometimes a traveling peddler comes through, promising miracles: bottles of tonic from the East, tins of ointment with names you cannot pronounce. You buy what you can, but more often than not, the contents are nothing but colored water and sugar. Still, you keep them on the shelf, just in case the sight of a real label will calm a frightened patient. You miss the certainty of real medicine, the kind you once took for granted. Here, you are more witch than doctor, more hopeful than skilled. When a child comes to you with fever, you weigh out grains of quinine as if you were counting pearls. When a man comes in with a cough that rattles his bones, you give him willow bark and pray he is not too far gone. You envy the doctors in the cities with their hospitals and their teams of nurses, their well lit rooms and cabinets full of medicine. You wonder if they ever know what it is to sit by candlelight, measuring out the last drops of laudanum, knowing that it will not be enough. You wonder if they have ever tried to treat pneumonia with nothing but honey and hope. On your worst days, you want to scream at the futility of it all, but you do not. You set your jaw, wrap another rag around a wound, and tell your patients that help is coming, that the pain will pass, that your medicine will work. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it does not. And when the shelves are empty and your hands are shaking, you remind yourself you are all they have. You are the doctor, the apothecary, the last thin line between sickness and the grave. Sometimes, after the lamp is blown out and the last footfall fades from your door, you sit at your table and try to remember the lectures from another lifetime. You picture your old professor, neatly bearded, sleeves spotless, pointer tapping the blackboard, speaking solemnly of tiny, invisible enemies. Germs, ladies and gentlemen, germs that hide in the water, that travel on your hands, that crawl unseen from one wound to the next. You wonder, out here on the ragged edge of civilization, if you are the only soul for 200 miles who believes in things you cannot see. You try to explain, sometimes to your patients, the fever comes not from the wind, nor from the night air, but from something smaller than dust, something that rides on every cough and dirty rag. Most just look at you, blank faced, as if you are reciting fairy tales. Some laugh outright, hard, scratchy laughs that sound like brooms on splintered floorboards. If the Lord wanted us to see them, He'd have made them bigger, wouldn't He? Says old Mrs. Booth every time you bring it up. Others just shrug, then spit, as if to rid themselves of nonsense. It is easy to see why they do not believe you. Their world is filled with things that are solid and cruel, broken bones, open wounds, teeth that ache and blacken, and finally fall out. You can point at a bullet lodged in a thigh, hold it up for all to see. You can pull a rotten tooth and display your prize, dripping with blood and victory. But you cannot show anyone the germs. There is no magic glass in your office, no microscope, no slides or colored stains. Just a battered anatomy book and your word, which is worth less than a mug of cold coffee when pain and habit have their say. And pain and habit always have their say. You see the consequences of this disbelief every day. Dirty hands shoving food into sullen mouths, unwashed water drawn from creeks that double as latrines, festering wounds packed with cow dung because that's how my granddaddy did it, and he lived to 80. You try to tell them that 80 is a miracle here, that most never see 60, but the old stories are stubborn, and the truth even more so. When you insist on boiling your rags, on scrubbing your hands before and after each patient, on burning the soiled bandages instead of tossing them into the hog pen, you are met with suspicion. Why waste good firewood on a bunch of dirty rags? The blacksmith grumbles, shaking his head as he watches you feed the flames. Clean's for the city folks, says his wife, and look how sickly they always look. You think of her children coughing through the winter, and you say nothing. You have learned that arguing is as futile as wishing for rain in August. Sometimes, late at night, you recall outbreaks back east, cholera turning city blocks into graveyards, yellow fever raging up and down the riverfronts. You remember the frantic voices, the smell of lye and vinegar, the endless processions of bodies wrapped in sheets and hurried to mass graves. Out here, death comes quietly, one at a time, a slow drip that never quite stops. There are no quarantines, no red flags on doors, no notices nailed to town halls, just a steady trickle of sickness, a vague unease that passes from house to house until every face looks hollow. When a child dies of diphtheria, the family weeps and then wraps the body in a blanket and buries it at dawn. They say it was God's will and move on. You try to tell them it could have been different if only they had kept the wounds clean, boiled the water, kept the sick separate from the well. But out here, the word different is a dangerous thing, almost as unwelcome as the invisible germs you chase. Doctors just scared of ghosts, says old man Jeffers, and everyone laughs. Sometimes, though, you see a glimmer of hope. The young ones, especially, listen to your warnings. They help you scrub the table, hang your bandages in the sun, pour scalding water over your instruments. You teach them about boiling, about soap and sunlight and fresh air. Some listen, some learn. Most forget the next time fever comes. You envy the certainty of the city doctors with their microscopes and test tubes, their clean wards and endless soap. You envy their ability to explain, to convince, to show the world what truly kills. Out here, you are a prophet without miracles, a teacher with nothing to point to but your own raw hands and weary eyes. So you wash and boil and burn. You whisper to yourself about germs and bacteria, repeating the litany of unseen dangers until you almost believe it will make a difference. You watch the coughs spread from one family to the next, the fevers bloom in the spring and fade in the fall, the wounds that rot and stink no matter how clean you try to keep them. And when another child is laid in the ground, you wonder, for the thousandth time, if it would matter even if you could make them see. You are haunted not by ghosts, but by things smaller than the eye can see. And in the silence of your empty cabin, you whisper their names to the darkness, hoping that someone, someday, will finally listen. You would like to believe that amputation is a rare thing, reserved for battlefield surgeons and horror stories whispered in city saloons. But out here, under the wide, unblinking sky of the West, Amputation is almost routine. It is as common as the dust that seeps through the cracks in your walls, as inevitable as the hunger that gnaws every winter. You have become, against your wishes, an expert in loss. The day always begins the same: a frantic knock, a breathless voice, sometimes a child, sometimes a neighbor, sometimes a horse tethered hastily outside. He's been hurt, Doc. The sawmill, the wagon wheel, the plow, the snake. They never need to say more. You know, before you even leave your chair, that someone is already half lost. Today it is the youngest McCabe boy, no more than 12, pale as moonlight, left foot twisted in a way that feet were never meant to twist. His father carried him in, face carved from stone, eyes wide and dry. You saw the wound and knew, bones splintered, flesh torn, a darkness already crawling up the leg, infected, angry, insatiable. You ask the questions you always ask, voice weary with repetition. How long ago did he feel the bite? Has the color changed? The answers matter only in degrees of urgency. Time is always against you, and the infection is always winning. You set the boy on your table, the same battered plank where you eat and sew and sometimes sleep. You gather your tools, already thinking of which ones you might have to throw away when it is over. You look at the boy's face, trying to find comfort in his youth, but there is none. He is old already, old in the way that pain and fear will age a soul before its time. You explain as gently as you can, though you know the words are small comfort. If I do not take the foot, the fever will take you. It will creep up your leg, into your belly, into your heart. The boy nods, jaw set, eyes dry. His father does not meet your gaze. You pour him whiskey, more than you should for a child, less than he will need. He drinks, coughs, and tries to joke. The men in the room laugh, brittle and afraid. You wash your hands, though you know it is mostly for show. You tie the tourniquet tight, above the knee, leather strap biting into his skin. The leg below has already gone cold and blue, a dead thing still clinging to the living. You pick up your saw, the teeth worn and pitted, but sharp enough for this brutal work. The room is silent now, all prayers spoken, all hope packed away with the clean rags. You cut. The sound is not what you would think, not a scream, not at first, but a grinding, tearing, splintering noise, as if you are cutting a rotten branch from a stubborn tree. The boy clenches his teeth, eyes rolling, body bucking against the hands that pin him to the table. You saw through flesh, through gristle, through bone. The blood comes hot and fast, then slows as the tourniquet does its work. When the leg is free, you drop it into the waiting bucket. You do not look at it. You never do. You clamp the arteries, fumble with the needle and thread, cursing your hands for shaking. You sew the stump close as best you can, leaving it raw and angry. You pack it with rags and bandages, praying for a miracle, but expecting nothing. When it is done, you slump back, drenched in sweat, mouth full of the taste of copper and bile. The boy is still breathing, just barely. You give him more whiskey, wipe his brow, and try to smile. His father sits by the bed, silent, the leg forgotten in the corner. Later, he will ask if you can make a wooden one, if he can trade you for a crutch, if the boy will ever walk again. You will give him the same answer you always give. Maybe, if he is lucky, if he is strong. You clean your tools, scrub the table, burn the bloodied rags if you have the wood to spare. You bury the leg outside, away from the well, where the coyotes will not dig it up. You lie awake that night, listening for the boy's fever, counting the hours until you know if you have saved him or just prolonged his suffering. Amputation is not heroism, not out here. It is defeat, measured in inches and memories. You remember every limb you have taken, how heavy they were, how cold, how stubbornly alive even in death. You remember the faces, boys and men, mothers and daughters, strangers and friends. You remember the ones who lived and the ones who did not. Sometimes you wonder how many legs, arms, and fingers you have cut away. You could line the road to town with them, a grim parade of all the things this place demands as payment for survival. You are tired, always tired, your hands never quite clean, your soul never quite whole. And yet, every time the knock comes, every time another soul is dragged in by hope or fear, you pick up your saw and do what must be done. It is not medicine. It is mercy by inches, survival by subtraction. If you believed in omens, you might think the sun's blood red rise is a warning, but out here it is just another day. You can always tell when payday is close. The saloon fills early, the laughter grows louder, and you hear boots stumbling in the street long before darkness falls. There is a certain rhythm to violence in this town, as predictable as the change of the weather, though rarely as gentle. Your surgery never sleeps on nights like these. Men stagger in pairs and threes, arms slung over shoulders, boots leaving streaks of blood and mud across your threshold. They come with faces split open, noses smashed flat, and hands wrapped in dirty handkerchiefs, makeshift bandages that do nothing to stop the flow. The stories are always the same: an insult, a spilled drink, a hand of cards gone sour. Add whiskey, and soon knives are drawn or bottles broken. Sometimes it is fists, but more often something sharper. Tonight's first patient is Tom, the tailor, though you suspect he was never very good with a needle. He stumbles in, pressing a shirt to his belly, the cloth already soaked through. You barely need to ask. The knife wound is obvious. You sit him down, ignoring his slurred apologies, and peel back the fabric. The wound is deep, but not fatal, if you are lucky, if he is not. You fish for the needle and the coarse thread, dip them in vinegar, and do what you can. He winces, muttering curses, but holds still. You have seen worse. He has too. The next is a ranch hand, one eyebrow split open and his ear nearly torn free, the result of a bottle wielded with admirable force. He is still grinning, teeth pink with blood, the taste of victory or defeat bitter in his mouth. You sew him up quickly, pressing hard when he starts to squirm. He does not thank you, only asks if you think the other fellow looks worse. You shrug. You are not a judge, just the poor soul left to pick up the pieces. As the night drags on, the parade continues. There is always someone with a broken finger, a dislocated shoulder, a black eye swollen shut. Sometimes women come too, patching up husbands or brothers, muttering under their breath about stupidity and men. You work in silence, your hands moving automatically, your mind drifting elsewhere. You try not to think about how much blood you have wiped from the same spot on the floor, how many times you have heard the same slurred promises to never drink again. You have learned over the years to recognize the patterns. The hesitation in a man's step as he limps in, the way he cradles his arm or keeps pressure on his side. You know when the wounds are shallow, badges of honor from a scuffle over nothing. You also know when to send for the sheriff when the blood seeps out too fast, or the knife found its mark a little too well. Occasionally, the fights spill outside into the dust and darkness. You hear the shouts, the crash of furniture, the high pitched wail of a dog startled by chaos. Sometimes you run, bag in hand, to where a man lies crumpled in the street, blood puddling beneath him. You crouch beside him, listening for breath, for a heartbeat, for a reason not to give up. You do what you can. You pack the wounds, sew the flesh, set the bones, and hope that the infection will not come. Infection is always the second wound, the silent knife that follows the first. You see men who survive the brawl only to die a week later, feverish and raving, wounds gone green and foul. You tell them to stay clean, to rest, to avoid the saloon. They never listen. The next week, they are back, the stitches barely healed. The knives themselves are a study in improvisation. Some are long and thin, made for skinning cattle, others short and crude, shaped from scraps of iron. You remove splinters and glass, bits of wood and bone, the detritus of 1,000 drunken arguments. Sometimes you find a coin or a button deep inside a wound, a strange souvenir of another man's anger. You never get used to the smell, the sharp, metallic bite of fresh blood mixed with sweat and whiskey, the sour stench of fear and old wounds reopened. Your hands are always sticky, your apron always stained, your table forever cluttered with the tools of patching up fools. The sound of laughter from the saloon sometimes drifts in on the wind, and you wonder if anyone inside knows or cares how close they have come to being your next patient. There is no rest for you on nights like these. When the last drunk is patched up and sent on his way, when the last curse has faded and the blood has finally dried, you sit by the window, staring into the dark. You listen to the quiet, broken only by the hoot of an owl or the faint moan of the wind. You think about the wounds you could not close, the lives that ended not with a gunshot, but with a careless word and a knife drawn too quick. In the morning, you will mop the floor, boil the rags, and scrub your hands until the skin peels. But some stains do not wash out. Some nights you lie awake, listening for the next fight, knowing it is only a matter of time before the cycle repeats. This is the Wild West. Out here, the line between life and death is as thin and sharp as any knife, and you, with your needle and thread, are all that stands in the way. You could fill a whole ledger with the names of children lost to the simplest fevers. They come to you coughing, shivering, eyes glazed and skin too warm, and you know before you even lay a hand on their forehead that there is little you can do. Out here, childhood is a fragile thing, and the battle against disease is waged daily, quietly, and almost always lost. It starts with the small things. The constant itching and scratching, lice living in every scalp, nits hidden in every blanket. You see mothers sit in the shade, picking through hair strand by strand, the pile of tiny white eggs growing beside them. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it does not. Then there is the coughing. Every child coughs, it seems, from the moment they are born until the day they are buried. You tell their parents to keep them warm, to feed them broth and keep them out of the night air. The parents nod, but the wind slips through every wall, and warmth is just another story from somewhere east. There are rashes, too. Scarlet fever leaves its mark in red blisters and peeling skin. Measles come in waves, moving from house to house, always finding the weakest first. You try to quarantine the sick when you can, but families are large and homes are small. Siblings share beds, coughs, and all the ills the world can offer. The mothers ask you, is it the measles? Will it pass? You can only shrug. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it takes a child in the night, silent and sudden, before you even finish boiling your rags. Mumps swell cheeks until the children can hardly speak or eat. Chickenpox leaves scars, a roadmap of all the suffering that cannot be soothed with a mother's kiss. And then there is diphtheria, the true terror, white membranes choking the life out of even the strongest. You watch as parents hover helpless, unable to do anything but weep and pray. You have heard every prayer in every language this side of the Rockies, but you know that bacteria and viruses do not listen. There is always a season for something. One year it is whooping cough, the sound of it echoing through the alleys at all hours, keeping everyone awake. Another year it is scarlet fever, children with flushed cheeks and vacant eyes, burning up from the inside. There is never a good year. You mix your tonics and teas, ladle out honey with onion and herbs, make poultices for fevers, rub chests with whatever grease you can find. Some of your patients improve, most do not. The mothers thank you when their children recover, as if you had anything to do with it. They curse you quietly when the small graves are dug at the edge of the cemetery. The children themselves are braver than their parents. They greet you with the resigned patience of the already doomed, They hold out their arms for your bitter medicine, swallow without complaint, and stare up at you with eyes that have seen too much in too few years. Sometimes, when one is failing, you sit beside them late into the night, holding their hand and murmuring nonsense until their breathing slows and finally stops. You stay with the body until the mother is ready, because no one should face that silence alone. You keep a tally in your mind, though you wish you could forget. How many lost this winter? How many the spring before? You remember the faces, the last words, the way the fever seemed to burn away all the joy that should have filled those small rooms. The townspeople never speak of it openly. Grief is too heavy and too common to be named aloud. Instead, they bring you the next sick child, and the cycle begins again. You read your old notes sometimes, looking for something you missed, a trick, a cure, some scrap of wisdom from the professors back east. All you find are reminders of how little you truly know, how powerless you are against the armies of germs that move unseen and unstoppable through your town. There are days, in the rare heat of late summer, when the coughs seem to quiet, when the children run and shout in the dusty streets. You cling to those days, hoarding them like coins in a jar. But the quiet never lasts. The first chill of autumn brings another wave, and the mothers start knocking on your door again, faces drawn and desperate. Sometimes, late at night, you wonder what life would be like if you could save just one out of every two or three. You wonder if you would sleep easier, if your hands would shake less, if the mothers would look at you with something other than resignation or thin hope. But you know better. You are a doctor on the frontier, and childhood is a sickness that few survive whole. So you keep boiling water, keep mixing herbs, keep sitting by the bedsides of the feverish and the frail, doing what little you can, and watching the rest slip through your fingers. Out here, you are not so much a healer as a witness, recording each small loss, each brief hope, each inevitable end. If you ever grow too fond of your hands, your tools, or the work you do, infection is always there to set you straight. It waits patiently in the cracks of your floor, on the blade of your saw, in the sweet, sticky air of high summer. You can scrub until your fingers bleed, boil your rags and instruments, shout at your patients about boiling water and fresh air, and it will not matter. Out here, infection finds you eventually. Sometimes you think it is the only thing that truly thrives. The earliest signs are easy to dismiss: a little swelling, a flush of heat, a wound that does not close. You see it in the faces of men who come to you with a bullet graze, a broken finger, a cut from an axe blade. Just stitch it up, doc. I'll be fine. You do what you can: wash, suture, bandage. You send them home with a jar of salve and the sternest warning you can muster. The next day, they are back, red lines crawling up their arms, eyes clouded with fever. You have learned the feel of infected flesh. It is spongy, hot, and gives a little beneath your thumb, as if the body has started to melt from the inside out. The smell is unmistakable, a sickly, sweet stench that clings to your hands and clothes long after you have left the patient's side. Sometimes, late at night, you catch a whiff and cannot tell if it is your imagination or simply another patient waiting just outside your door. Gangrene is the infection's final gift, the rot that comes when the blood stops flowing and the flesh turns against itself. You have seen it in every color: green, black, purple, and in every part of the body. It starts small: a toe, a fingertip, the edges of a wound. But it never stays small. It creeps and spreads, relentless as the wind. The patients always ask the same thing: can you save it? You wish you could say yes. The only answer is the saw, the same tool you use for firewood and fence posts. You cut away what you can, praying that you have gone far enough, that the rot will not return. You cauterize the wound, the smell of burning flesh, almost a relief compared to the reek of decay. You watch the patient's face, sometimes unconscious, sometimes screaming, sometimes eerily silent, and you wonder which is worse: losing a part of yourself or losing hope altogether. Children are not spared. You see it after a fall, a scrape gone bad, a rusty nail driven deep. You do everything you can: poultices, hot water, honey, and prayers. Sometimes you win a small victory: a hand saved, a foot that does not blacken. More often, you are left holding another piece of someone's life, buried quickly and without ceremony, another memory to haunt you in the dark. The town has its own cures, most of them worse than the disease. Turpentine poured straight into wounds, hot coals pressed to festering flesh, poultices of manure and herbs. You argue, you plead, but habit is a hard thing to break. By the time they come to you, the damage is usually done. It was worth a try, they say, as you prepare your saw. You nod, not because you agree, but because words are useless now. You envy the city doctors with their newfangled antiseptics and clean linens, their teams of nurses and endless supplies of soap. You wonder if they ever wake in the night, heart pounding, sure they smell rot on their own skin. You doubt it. Out here, infection is part of the landscape, like dust and drought and disappointment. After every amputation, you stare at the bloody stump and tell yourself you did what you could. Sometimes it is true. Sometimes you wonder if you made things worse. The body is stubborn. It wants to live, even when living means losing everything that made you whole. When the fever breaks, you are left with a patient who is lighter by a limb or two, but alive. You count that as a win. If the fever does not break, you dig another grave at the edge of the cemetery, mark another line in your ledger, and tell yourself that tomorrow will be better. You clean your tools again, boil your rags, scrub your hands until they ache. The stink of infection lingers, seeping into the wood and the walls, into your dreams. You wonder if you will ever be clean again. The others in town watch you work, eyes wide, whispering stories about the doctor with the bloody apron, the one who takes more than he gives. You let them talk. You would rather be feared than pitied. At the end of each day, you sit by your door, listening to the wind and the distant howls of coyotes. Infection is out there, moving silently through the dark, waiting for its next invitation. You will fight it again tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until the world changes, or you are buried with the rest. On the frontier, rot is just another part of life, and you, as always, are the only thing that stands between your neighbors and the darkness inside their own flesh. You keep a little notebook hidden under a loose board beneath your bed. It is your own private census, a ledger of endings. You do not write down the victories. There are too few, and most never last. Instead, you keep careful track of the funerals, not because you are morbid, but because the numbers are the only thing that still makes sense. Every week, it seems, there is a new grave dug at the edge of town. Sometimes it is a quiet affair, just a family, a preacher, a handful of words tossed into the wind. Sometimes the whole town gathers, faces tight with something that looks like respect, but feels more like exhaustion. You stand off to the side, always, hat in hand, coat buttoned to the neck no matter the weather. You are never sure what is expected of you. Are you the bringer of the end or the last comfort before it comes? The ritual is always the same. Someone calls for the preacher, who arrives with his battered Bible and worn out boots. He stands at the head of the grave, voice thin but determined, reciting the same words he has spoken 100 times before. From dust you came, to dust you shall return. You listen, and sometimes you mouth the words with him, almost out of habit. The faces around the grave are all familiar: mothers clutching handkerchiefs, fathers staring at their boots, children trying not to cry. There are not enough good coffins, so most are buried in pine boxes, hammered together quickly from whatever scrap wood is left over from someone's barn. A few are wrapped in quilts or blankets, shrouds that smell of home and loss. The ground is always hard, frozen in winter, baked dry in summer. The men dig anyway, calloused hands blistering against shovels, sweat freezing or streaming, depending on the season. You make a mark in your book for every burial. You record the names, the ages when you know them, the causes if you can bear to write them down: fever, 6 years; childbirth, 31 years; snake bite, 24 years; gunshot, unknown. The pages fill faster than you care to admit. Sometimes, when you cannot sleep, you run your finger down the list, whispering the names, remembering the faces. The numbers are relentless, but it is the names that haunt you. The children are the hardest. Their graves are smaller, the gatherings quieter. No one expects children to outlast the winter, but the hope is always there, stubborn as weeds. You see mothers press little shoes into the earth, fathers carve shaky letters into crosses, siblings standing a little apart, trying to understand. You do not know what to say to them. You have run out of lies, and the truth is too heavy to share. There are times when you wonder if the town is shrinking faster than it can grow. You look at the statistics in your ledger and know it is true. One year, you counted more deaths than births, by far. You stopped sharing those numbers. No one wanted to hear them. The preacher told you that hope was more important than arithmetic. You wish you could agree. Some deaths go unnoticed, unmarked. A drifter buried by the riverbank, a prospector lost in the hills, an old woman who simply stopped waking up. You record them too, even when no one else remembers. You think it is important that someone keeps count, even if the numbers are always grim. The town has its own ways of mourning. Some folks drink, some fight, some simply disappear for days at a time, returning with new scars and a little less of themselves. You try to offer comfort where you can, a hand on a shoulder, a few words, a quiet nod, but it never feels like enough. You are the doctor, after all. You were supposed to prevent this, or so they say. Every so often, a family leaves a little offering on your step after a funeral, a pie, a jar of preserves, a pair of knitted mittens. You know it is not gratitude. It is more like a payment for ferrying their loved ones across the last dark river, for sitting with the dying, for facing the rot and the blood and the stink of endings. You accept the gifts, nod your thanks, and add another name to your book. You have learned not to dwell too long on the statistics. They will break you if you let them. Instead, you count in smaller ways. The number of days since the last fever, the number of weeks since you buried a mother with child, the number of months since you saw a healthy child playing in the street. Hope out here is measured in gaps between funerals. At the end of each month, you sit by candlelight and tally your ledger, reading over the names and the causes, the little notes you scrawl in the margins. Could not save. Too late. Infection set in. Died in sleep. No kin. The margins are filling up. You do not know what you will do when you run out of paper. Sometimes, in the deep of night, you wonder if there is a place in the world where the ledgers stay empty, where the funerals are rare and the statistics do not climb like weeds. You try to imagine it, but the vision slips away, replaced by the memory of another open grave, another handful of dust. You close your book, hide it away, and wait for the next knock on your door. The numbers are never on your side. And listen again, for as long as you are needed, you keep counting. Your reputation, like everything else out here, is a product of necessity and rumor, stitched together from equal parts fact, fear, and wishful thinking. You are the doctor because no one else will be. You are the last stop before the preacher, the person people turn to when they have exhausted every home remedy, every prayer, every folk tale passed down by grandmothers who lived and died long before these houses were built. They talk about you in the saloon at night, over hands of cards and warm whiskey. Some call you a miracle worker, others a butcher. You have heard every version. You are the only reason my son is alive, and the reason my wife is gone. You are brave enough to cut a bullet out of a man's leg and too cold to shed a tear at a funeral. The words swirl around you like the dust in the streets, sticking to you, impossible to wash off. In the daylight, people nod to you, tip their hats, even smile if they are feeling generous. Children watch you from a distance, wide eyed and silent, as if you might be able to see through skin and bone. Some run to you when they scrape a knee or need a splinter pulled. Others hide behind their mother's skirts, convinced you carry bad luck in your pockets. No one trusts you completely, not really. Trust is a fragile thing on the frontier, worn thin by hunger and hope and the endless parade of disasters that pass for daily life. They want to believe in your skills, but the world has taught them to be cautious. You are educated, which means you use words they do not understand and believe in things they cannot see. Sometimes that makes you wise, sometimes it makes you dangerous. You have learned that every success is temporary. Mend a broken leg, and you are a hero until the wound festers or the limp never quite goes away. Save a woman in childbirth, and you are blessed until the next one dies and the whispers start anew. It is always the doctor did his best until someone needs to blame the pain on something, someone. Then it is your fault, your failure, your curse. There are always a few who resent you for charging at all. They forget that you eat the same stale bread, patch your roof with the same leaky tar, and trade your services for the same handful of beans or eggs, or an IOU scrawled on a scrap of paper. They grumble that you favor the rich, though out here, rich means a cow that survived the winter, or a pair of boots without holes. Some evenings, you hear your name shouted on the wind, drunk and angry, after a funeral, after a fight. Doc thinks he's better than the rest of us. Doc just wants to play God. You keep your door bolted on nights like those, listening to boots crunch past your window, the anger burning itself out in the dark. But there are other nights, too. Nights when a woman comes with a sick child in her arms, desperate enough to try anything. Nights when a man brings you a bottle of whiskey, not as payment, but as thanks for sitting beside his wife until the end. Nights when a note appears under your door, thank you for what you did. You keep those notes, folded and yellowing, in a tin with your other treasures, a child's drawing, a button from a coat, a handful of wildflowers pressed flat. Your reputation shifts with the seasons, the fortunes of the harvest, the memory of the last disaster. In the spring, when babies are born and wounds heal clean, you are a blessing. In the winter, when the snow piles high and fevers claim 3 in a week, you are an omen. No one says it to your face, but you see the glances, the quick signs of the cross, the way some mothers hide their children when you walk by. You do not argue. You do not defend yourself. You have learned that the town needs its stories more than it needs the truth. They need to believe in something, miracles or monsters, saints or scapegoats. You are whichever one they need, depending on the day. In quiet moments, you catch your own reflection in the window, hollow eyes, stained apron, hands that never quite stop shaking. You wonder what you would think of yourself if you did not know the weight you carry. if you saw only the doctor who keeps a ledger of deaths and a shelf of empty bottles. But reputation is just another frontier currency, spent and traded in the marketplace of loss. It buys you a place at the table, a seat at the fire, sometimes even a measure of forgiveness. You carry it like your bag of tools wherever you go, knowing that you can never put it down and that it will never be quite clean. At the end of the day, you are the town's hope and its disappointment, its healer and its reminder that life here is as fragile as a frost touched leaf. You are the doctor. That is all you can be. And out here, that is both everything and never enough. Your cabin stands a little apart from the rest, far enough away to keep the sick from breathing on their neighbors, close enough that anyone desperate can still find you in the dark. Sometimes you pretend it was your choice, this distance, but you know it was made for you. Disease travels quick and quiet, and nobody wants it lingering in their home. For everyone's safety, they said when you arrived, it's better this way. You told them you understood, but you do not think anyone truly understands what it means to be necessary, but never wanted. Every day begins and ends the same. The sun crawls up behind the hills, pale and reluctant. You hear the morning stir in the rest of the town, the cough of livestock, the clatter of water buckets, the mutter of voices before work begins. Your own cabin is silent. You rise alone, wash your face in cold water, eat your bread and old cheese, and stare at the table where you do all your work, meals, amputations, and, on rare evenings, a letter to no one that you never send. If you look out your window at just the right angle, you can see the life you are not quite a part of. The children running after the chickens, mothers shooing them away from the well, the men huddled around the blacksmith's fire. You could walk down there, join the talk, maybe borrow a cup of sugar, but you do not. There is always the risk of spreading something, of being asked a question you cannot answer, or just of being reminded by the silences and the sideways looks that you are not one of them. You eat your meals alone, quickly, without ceremony. Most days there is little to eat. You save your best for your patients, what little broth you can manage, a crust of bread, a rare bit of fruit from a summer garden. For yourself, you make do with less, always planning for a winter that never seems to end. You talk to yourself sometimes. At first, it was a joke. Now, it is a habit. You ask questions, make notes, curse at the stubborn stains that will not come out of your shirt. Some days, you read aloud from your old anatomy book just to fill the silence. The pages are marked with blood and oil, the ink faded by candle smoke and time. The nights are the worst. When the wind howls down off the hills and rattles your shutters, you feel every mile between you and anyone else. You listen for footsteps, for the sound of the bell at your door, for anything to break the monotony. Sometimes you think you would welcome a crisis just for the company. More often, you dread it, knowing it means someone else will suffer before the night is done. There are letters from home, old, creased, read until the words are nearly gone. A sister, a father, friends you have not seen since before the war. You imagine answering, telling them of your triumphs, your clever solutions, your steady hand. But the truth is harder. You are tired, and most days you feel more like a custodian of misery than a bringer of hope. You have acquaintances, but not friends. The shopkeeper nods to you and saves you the last of the flour. The blacksmith repairs your tools for free once in a while. The preacher sometimes sits with you after a funeral, both of you silent, each lost in your own arithmetic of loss. But there are no gatherings for you, no long evenings by the fire, no laughter that lingers after the sun goes down. You keep busy because the alternative is to remember. Remember the faces you could not save, the children who slipped away, the women who bled out in childbirth, the men who cursed you with their last breath. You sweep your floor, clean your tools, write your notes. You tend to your little patch of garden, coaxing bitter greens from the reluctant dirt. You talk to your plants, too. They do not argue or ask you why you failed. Sometimes, in the dead of night, you wonder if you would choose this life again. If there was another road, another town, another profession, would you take it? Or are you just as much a prisoner of duty as you are of loneliness? You are not sure. You do not think there are answers, just questions that rattle around your skull with the wind. You watch the seasons change outside your window. Spring brings mud, summer brings dust, autumn brings wind, and winter brings the kind of cold that makes the bones ache. With each turn of the year, you mark another line on the wall, another cycle completed. The world goes on, and so do you. You lie awake some nights, listening to the creak of the beams above, the soft scuttle of mice beneath the floor, the sigh of your own breath. You remember that you are alive, even if it does not always feel like living. And you wait for the next knock on your door, for the next crisis, for the next reminder that you are still needed, even if you are never truly known. On the frontier, loneliness is not a condition to be cured. It is simply another fact of life, as inescapable as dust or hunger. You bear it as best you can, shoulders hunched, heart closed, always just a little apart from everything you once hoped to find. If you ever thought your greatest challenge would be blood or bone, you were wrong. The real battle is against things that cannot be seen, not bacteria, but beliefs. Superstition is a currency in the West, more valuable than gold, more contagious than fever, more stubborn than old wounds. It is the air everyone breathes, the thread that runs through every story told over a night fire or whispered between neighbors when the sun goes down. From the moment you arrived, you realized that science was a foreign tongue here. You remember your first winter, how you tried to explain the importance of boiling water, or how a wound left uncovered would draw flies, and with them, death. The looks you received were not of gratitude or comprehension, but skepticism and faint pity. "That's not how my mother did it," said the farmer's wife, as she rubbed a poultice of lard and garlic into a festering gash on her husband's leg. He'll be right as rain in a day or two. You doubted it, and you were right. There is a cure for everything in this place, none of which are yours. A horseshoe above every door, a rabbit's foot tucked under a pillow for sick children. When someone is burned, they smear the wound with cold butter and bury the used bandage beneath the porch to keep away bad spirits. You have seen wounds stuffed with chewed tobacco, spider webs pressed into cuts, and one memorable case where a man's wife tried to stop his cough by hanging an onion around his neck until it rotted. When he died, they buried the onion with him. You try to reason. You draw pictures, recite facts, offer alternatives. Sometimes you even succeed. If the fever breaks or the wound closes, you earn a small, grudging respect. But if your remedies fail, or worse, if they take longer than the old ways, the people quietly return to what they know. There are always whispers. It was the new medicine that made it worse. My grandmother's salve never failed. God punishes pride. You find yourself more and more often biting your tongue rather than starting another argument you cannot win. When you insist on cleanliness, on boiling your instruments, on burning soiled rags, you are met with suspicion. That's wasteful, says the storekeeper's wife. We used that water to feed the chickens. When you tell people to stay indoors during outbreaks, you are accused of trying to keep them from their work, or worse, of hiding something from them. If you could bottle suspicion and sell it, you would never go hungry again. It is the old women, especially, who fight you hardest. Their wisdom is deep, and their memory longer than yours. They know which plant to pick for a stomach ache, which charm to sew into a baby's blanket to ward off night terrors. You cannot dismiss them. They have saved lives, and their remedies sometimes work, though you suspect luck has as much to do with it as skill. When you visit a home and find garlic strung from every beam, or a sick child's pillow stuffed with sage, you nod politely and do not argue. Some things are not worth the fight. Still, you do not give up. You slip your warnings into every conversation. Teach the children to wash their hands in the creek before supper. Show mothers how to air out the bed sheets. Sometimes the small victories matter. A cut that heals without infection, a baby who survives the winter, a family that listens just enough to keep their water clean. But for every step forward, there are two back. You cannot compete with the faith placed in charms, prayers, or the old man who swears by snake oil and the laying on of hands. When you fail, because everyone fails eventually, the people say it is because you do not respect the old ways, because you meddle with what you do not understand. On the loneliest nights, you wonder if they are right. After all, you have seen miracles and disasters in equal measure. You have watched men walk away from wounds that should have killed them, and children die from a simple cough. You have nothing but guesses, half truths, and the stubborn belief that knowledge matters more than magic. You have learned, at least, to tread lightly, to respect the stories, if not the logic behind them. to humor the charms and rituals, even as you boil your rags in secret and whisper prayers for clean wounds and quiet nights. There is a humility in defeat. There is also a strange comfort in knowing that, here at the edge of everything, no one really knows what works and what does not. You remind yourself, people have survived worse, often in spite of medicine, not because of it. Superstition is not your enemy. It is just another patient you cannot cure. At the end of the day, you bandage what you can, bite your tongue, and walk home beneath the sky so vast it makes your small victories and your endless frustrations seem almost bearable. You are not just a doctor. Out here, you are a reluctant priest, a skeptic among believers, an interpreter of dreams and fevers, always half believed and half doubted, and always, always fighting shadows. Fatigue is your truest companion on the frontier. It sits with you at breakfast, lingers by your side while you make your rounds, and waits for you on the doorstep each evening, silent and patient. You once believed that exhaustion was a problem you could solve with sleep, with better habits, with time. Now you understand it is simply the cost of breathing out here, the invisible tax paid by those who try to keep others alive. Your body aches before you even rise. You feel it in your hands, thick and clumsy in the morning chill, in your knees as you walk the uneven floor, in your back, a dull ache that no bed or chair will ever soothe. Your head is a fog of half slept nights, interrupted by the cries of the dying or the sudden, jarring crash of knuckles on your door. Even in sleep, your mind stays vigilant, listening for the next emergency, the next desperate call for help. You do not count hours anymore. You count tasks, bandages changed, wounds stitched, fevers tended, meals skipped. You move through your days in a trance, each action the memory of a habit, each habit another thread in the great, unraveling tapestry of duty. You drink your weak coffee, chew your stale bread, and know that energy will never be enough. There is always more to do. Sometimes you wake in the night, unsure if it is still night or already morning. The candle gutters low, your pen fallen from your hand, your notes trailing off mid sentence. You try to remember when you last slept a full night. No interruptions, no nightmares, no voices calling from the edge of consciousness. You cannot recall. Maybe it was in another life before you came west. Your hands tremble when you hold the scalpel, though you try to hide it. You drop things more often now, forceps clattering to the floor, bottles tipping, rags slipping from your grasp. You learn to pretend it is nothing, that you are still in control. The patients notice, but they say nothing. They need you to be strong, even when you are not. Hunger is another companion, but it is easier to ignore than the fatigue. You can go hours without eating, sometimes whole days, lost in work and worry. When you do eat, it is hurried, distracted, your mind already on the next crisis. You barely taste your food and it barely sustains you. The fatigue eats first, and it is always greedy. The world outside keeps its own pace. The children laugh and shout. The cows bellow in the pasture. The blacksmith hammers his iron. You watch it all through a haze, feeling separate, as if you exist in a world just to the side of theirs. Every noise is louder than it should be. Every color is dull. The people notice your fatigue, though they do not always understand it. Some think you are lazy when you turn them away for an hour of rest, or selfish when you lock your door and lie down on your cot, boots still on, eyes closed but mind racing. Others see the circles under your eyes and worry that you are ill. You try to reassure them, but you do not remember the last time you felt well. You write letters in your head that you never send. Dear sister, I am tired, more tired than I thought possible. My bones hurt, my hands ache, and my dreams are filled with things I cannot fix. But you do not write these words because you know there is no cure, no medicine for what you carry. There is only the work and the endless grinding repetition of days. You are angry sometimes, angry at the world for needing so much, for never being satisfied, for always asking you to give more than you have. You are angry at yourself for failing, for the mistakes you make when your eyes blur and your hands shake. You snap at people, lose your temper, apologize later, then do it again. The guilt lingers, heavy and sour. It is easier to blame yourself than to admit that you are simply human, simply mortal, simply unable to keep pace with the endless demands. You wonder how long you can keep going, how long before you collapse and someone else has to take your place. But you know there is no one else. You are all there is. Sometimes you dream of leaving, of walking away, of finding a quiet place where no one knows your name or needs your hands. But then the morning comes, or the next knock rattles your door, and you rise, pull on your coat, and go back to work. It is what you do. It is who you are. Endless fatigue is the price you pay for being needed. It is the shadow that follows every act of kindness, every attempt to save a life. It is the reminder that out here, even the strongest grow weary, and the only thing that keeps you going is the knowledge that if you stop, the cost will be paid by someone else. You carry your fatigue with you day after day, night after night. You endure because that is all there is left to do. Out here, even sleep is hard work, and rest is just another broken promise. You learn to live with it. There is no other choice. It begins as a tickle at the back of your throat, a hot flush over your brow, a tremor in your hands that you hope is just fatigue. You tell yourself it is nothing, a bad night's sleep, a draft under the door, the memory of someone else's fever clinging to your skin. You pour yourself another cup of bitter coffee, wrap your coat tighter, and try not to notice how cold you suddenly feel. But the truth is, nothing frightens you more than your own body's small betrayals. You are the doctor, the last hope in the first line, and you know better than anyone how quickly sickness can come for the strong. You have watched the healthiest men in town turn gray overnight, mothers waste away in weeks, children shrivel in days. You know every warning sign by heart. You have written them in your own ledger. Each new ache or cough becomes a private trial. You check your tongue in the mirror, pale or spotted. You study your own eyes, yellow, red, hollow. Every twinge in your gut, every fleeting chill brings a parade of diagnoses to mind, each more dire than the last. Sometimes you wake in the dark and check your pulse, convinced it is fluttering in some unnatural rhythm. The mind, you discover, is a cruel diagnostician, forever imagining the worst. You do not tell anyone, of course. A doctor cannot afford to look weak, especially not here. Who would care for the sick if you became one of them? Who would boil the rags, mend the wounds, keep the fevers at bay? You imagine yourself lying in your own narrow cot, feverish and delirious, and the thought is almost worse than death. No one would come, not because they do not care, but because they would not dare. You recall the city, where sick doctors had other doctors to care for them, hospitals filled with nurses, and endless white sheets. Out here, there is no such comfort. Out here, you are your own physician, your own nurse, your only friend. If you fall alone. The townsfolk would help, perhaps, bring you water, leave food on your doorstep, pray for you from a safe distance. But none would risk the close work of tending. None would risk catching what you have. You keep working, of course. There is always more to do. You wear a scarf over your mouth when you feel a cough coming on. Tell your patients it is for the dust. You double the dose of willow bark in your tea. Chew mint to hide the taste of bile. Sometimes you get better, sometimes you get worse. Either way, the work does not stop. You are haunted by memories of other doctors, those who fell to the same diseases they fought. There was Dr. Willoughby, 2 towns over, who nursed half the valley through a fever and died in his own bed, alone but for his ledger and his regrets. There was old Nurse Betty, whose cough grew so harsh she could barely speak, yet kept working until her breath gave out one morning before dawn. You remember their funerals, small, hurried, attended mostly by those who owed their lives to the dead. You remember the hollow, frightened looks in the mourner's eyes. At your lowest, you wonder if it would not be easier to give in, to lie down, close your eyes, and let the world carry on without you. But then you hear the knock at your door, see the face in the window, feel the weight of another life balanced on your decision to rise. So you do. Every time you do, you become superstitious in your own way. You avoid the beds you have just stripped, wash your hands until the skin cracks, burn more vinegar in the air, mutter charms under your breath, words you mocked once but cling to now because there is nothing else to hold. You count the days since your last illness, tally them like notches in your ledger. Each new sunrise feels like a victory, each breath a reprieve. Sometimes, when you feel well, you almost laugh at your own fears. Almost. You have lived too long and seen too much to ever trust your body completely. In the end, the fear becomes a kind of companion, quieter than fatigue, but just as persistent. It reminds you to be careful, to be humble, to cherish each moment when your hands are steady and your mind is clear. It keeps you vigilant, if not always hopeful. And so you move through your days, half healer, half patient, always aware that you are one misstep, one stray cough, one unlucky day away from becoming the next name in your own ledger. You do not pray often, but on the nights when the wind moans outside and the fever flushes your skin, you close your eyes and whisper to whatever gods might be listening, "Not yet, not tonight, not while there is still work to be done." You wake in the morning, if you wake at all, grateful for a little while to still be needed, to still be here, to still be well enough to answer the next desperate knock. Out here, illness is a hunter, and you are never truly safe. But you keep moving, because the only thing worse than being sick is being the last doctor for miles and falling anyway. You tell yourself that joy has no business in a place like this. That out here, on the ragged edge of the world, happiness is just another myth. Something that happens to other people somewhere far away under softer skies. And yet, even here, you find moments so strange and gentle that they make you forget, for a breath or two, how bleak everything truly is. They come without warning, these moments. Sometimes, in the hush after a storm, when the whole town feels washed clean and even the air seems lighter. Sometimes, in the look a mother gives her child, newly recovered, eyes bright and wild with relief. Sometimes, in the simplest things, a good crop of beans, a letter from home, a kind word when you need it most. They are brief, almost shy, but they are real, and you learn to recognize them when they pass through your life. The rarest, and perhaps the sweetest, is the moment when someone you thought was lost comes back. A child's fever breaks in the gray light of dawn, and suddenly their breathing is easy, their cheeks pink again. You watch them sleep, one hand curled around their mother's finger, and you feel something like hope stir in your chest, a sharp, bright ache that feels almost dangerous. You allow yourself a smile, small and private, and tuck it away for later. Sometimes your patients leave you little gifts: a jar of wild honey, a loaf of fresh bread, a sketch of a flower on a scrap of brown paper. These tokens do not fix anything. Your back still aches, your shelves are still bare, but you keep them all the same. In a tin by your bed, you save every note, every child's drawing, every awkward thank you written in shaky hand. On your darkest nights, you take them out and remind yourself that even the smallest kindness can survive out here. There are other joys, quieter still, the sound of rain on the roof when you are inside and warm, the sight of a deer in the morning mist, the feel of your own breath steady and strong after a night without nightmares. Sometimes it is nothing more than the pleasure of a well-told story by an old patient, or the laughter that bubbles up when someone makes a joke at their own expense, both of you briefly forgetting the weight of what waits outside the door. You learn to take pride in your rare successes: the leg you save, the wound that heals clean, the mother who lives to hold her child. These are not miracles, and you know it. More often than not, they are the result of luck, stubbornness, and a few grains of quinine you somehow manage to ration just right. But you let yourself count them as victories. You need to. Occasionally, the town remembers to be grateful. They invite you to a harvest dinner, seat you at the head of a long, creaking table. Someone toasts your name, and for a moment, you are just another neighbor, laughing at the preacher's bad jokes, trading stories with the blacksmith, letting your guard down for a single night. You tell yourself not to expect it again. Joy here is rationed, like everything else. Once, on your birthday, the children brought you a cake, lopsided, with too much molasses and not enough flour, but a cake all the same. They sang to you in their small, bright voices, and you laughed until you had to wipe your eyes on your sleeve. Later, alone, you cut the last piece in half and saved it for the morning, telling yourself that life is still worth celebrating, even here. There is a certain joy in routine, too. A day when nothing goes wrong, when the only patients are scrapes and splinters, when you can sit on your stoop at dusk and watch the sky turn from gold to purple to black, undisturbed. You sip your bitter coffee and listen to the quiet, letting yourself believe, if only for a moment, that peace is possible. These moments do not last. The next storm, the next epidemic, the next accident is always just around the corner. But you learn to savor joy while it is here, to hide it in the deepest pocket of your heart. You have to. Without it, the long days would crush you. The losses would become too heavy to carry. You see it in others too. The way the mothers hug their children a little tighter. The way the men laugh at the bar even after another hard season. The way the whole town gathers for a wedding or a dance, determined to carve out something bright in the darkness. You stand at the edge, watching, a part of things but not truly belonging. And yet, for a while, you share in their happiness. You tell yourself that the next time you lose someone, you will remember these moments. Sometimes you do. Sometimes the grief drowns everything else, and all you can feel is the absence where something bright used to be. But eventually, joy returns, unexpected, uninvited, and always, somehow, enough. In the end, it is these rare, stubborn sparks that keep you going. Not duty, not habit, not even hope, just the knowledge that somewhere, at the end of a long day or a longer night, there might be a moment when you remember what it is to feel alive. Out here, that is more than enough. Out here, even a fleeting joy is precious, and you cling to it with both hands. Night settles on the town like a worn out quilt, patched and heavy, stitched together with 1,000 threads of sorrow, routine, and resignation. Your cabin creaks as the air cools, the old timbers shifting as if restless themselves, haunted by memories that refuse to sleep. You wash your hands by lantern light, the water turning pink, then brown, the stains never truly leaving your skin, no matter how hard you scrub. Your breath fogs the glass, and outside, the darkness hums with the low chorus of insects and the distant yelp of coyotes. You do not undress before bed. You learned long ago that sleep is always interrupted here by pain, by panic, by the sudden knowledge that someone else's need will not wait for sunrise. You lie down in your clothes, boots at the foot of your narrow cot, the blanket heavy over your chest, the ledger of the day's failures and small mercies tucked beneath your pillow. Your eyes close, but your mind does not rest. Images drift through the thin gap between waking and dreaming. The flicker of fever in a child's eyes, the long, pale hands of a woman in labor, the stifled curses of men who think dying is just another kind of bad luck. You hear the creak of the windmill, the low moan of the wind, the soft, insistent knocking that might be a memory or might be the start of another long night. Some nights you do not sleep at all. You lie still, listening for footsteps outside, the hurried scuff of boots, the desperate tap at your door. Sometimes it comes. A neighbor with a bleeding hand, a boy with a rattling cough, a rider bringing news that someone is dying, quickly or slowly, but always in need. You answer the door with eyes full of exhaustion and hands that remember their work even when your head aches with longing for oblivion. The cabin never feels more lonely than in these hours, lit only by the blue flame of your last stub of candle, the darkness crowding in at the windows. You move like a ghost through your own life, a warden of other people's pain, a steward of the hours between dusk and dawn. When the crisis passes, you sit at the edge of your cot, hunched and hollow, staring at your hands. They look like a stranger's, scarred, raw, marked by every night you did not sleep, every wound you could not heal. You wonder briefly if you will remember your own name in the morning, or if you will simply become the doctor again, a title heavier than any you ever wanted to wear. There is a particular quiet just before dawn, a hush so deep it feels like the whole world is holding its breath, waiting to see if another day will truly begin. You sit by the window, shivering in your coat, watching the sky shift from black to slate to the palest, most fragile gray. The town is still, every house a silent box, every life paused between yesterday's grief and today's obligations. You think about leaving sometimes, about locking your door and walking east toward the promise of places where the nights are not so long and the need is not so sharp. But then you remember, out here, you are the only doctor for 100 miles. You have buried too many to walk away now. So you watch the light crawl over the hills, slow and stubborn, and you ready yourself for another round. When the first rooster crows, you rise. Your back protests, your stomach grumbles, your feet ache before they touch the cold floor. You drink what is left of yesterday's coffee, swallow a bite of bread, and look at the battered shelf where your tools lie waiting. The sun slides above the horizon, pale and weak, revealing every flaw in your little home. The chipped mug, the cracked basin, the stains on the walls that never truly fade. Outside, the day begins again. Children calling to each other in the street, mothers hauling water, men shouldering tools and grief in equal measure. You stand at the threshold, the weight of the night pressing down on your shoulders, and you remind yourself you are needed. You are not ready. You will never be ready. You step out into the gray, the grass cold beneath your boots, the world washed clean by the empty promise of a new day. You feel the wind on your face and wonder how many more mornings you will see, how many more times you will open the door to someone else's pain, someone else's hope. You do not have an answer. The day stretches before you, long and uncertain, filled with all the old dangers, accident, sickness, hunger, anger, and the slow, relentless wearing down of hope. You brace yourself against it, not out of courage, but out of habit. Out here, survival is an act of will, and every dawn is both a victory and a defeat. The sun rises, weak but insistent, casting thin shadows on the hard ground. You wipe your hands on your coat, take a deep breath, and walk toward whatever comes next. Tomorrow will be the same, and the next day, and the one after that, until you are spent, until someone else takes up the burden, until the world changes or you do not wake at all. On the frontier, there is no true rest. There is only the long night, the broken sleep, and the endless, unremarkable miracle of another day.